You have found the portal into the Laughing Stoic Buddha universe. LSB podcast with Nick Bibeau.
You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think.
To acquire and arrive at is based on having never left. Yeah, I'm just chilled out because.
Sean, Alexander, welcome to the Laughing Stoic Buddha podcast.
Thanks for having me, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. This has been a long time coming. So we both started on, it was Twitter at the time, a little over 4 months ago in July. And you were the first Twitter friend, first Twitter person that I had come across that I was very insistent that I wanted to do a podcast with. This is months and months ago.
I appreciate that. I don't really know why that was the case. Can I ask why? Was that?
Well, it was pretty much exclusively because I read a post that you did on Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and then you were doing like a whole series on it, and
Right.
So like I was sold on the first time, like, oh, so I've been obsessed with Joseph Campbell. I read Here with a Thousand Faces, and you know, just sort of I have this very blue collar, low level idea of it, but it's something that I think about a lot when I write, something I enjoy talking about. And when I read your post, I was like, oh, here's a dude that's like next level on this stuff. I can tell that you've been studying it for a long time. You've been
Right.
applying it in your own writing, in your own storytelling, script writing. And so that's really the main thing. And then we had a lot of interactions just on the timeline.
Right.
You more than anyone else, I felt like I had a relationship with without ever really hearing your voice or talking to you. We just would comment on each other's posts, and you always had really interesting insights on the stuff that I had written. I always enjoyed reading everything that you wrote. And so we had this real, like almost old school pen pal relationship for many months of purely text. And then finally I got to hear your voice in a space. Finally got to see your
It's
face.
nasty, isn't it? It's nasty. That's why I keep my voice on the down low. My voice is fine, but it's just that it's fine.
Hey, fight will get you by. And then yeah, we finally met on a Zoom, I don't know, a little over a week ago, and I finally caught the big fish. I got Sean, my original.
Now I'm feeling a little
podcast.
self-conscious of my size, Nick. Jesus Christ. All right, it's fine. I used to be bigger. That's why.
Big fish in the ideas category, not in
Sure,
the yeah.
for sure.
So yeah, so I finally got you here. This has been months in the making. Looking forward to diving into your story. As you know, I'm very passionate about writing myself, but I've been doing it that long. I'm coming up on 2 years. You've been doing it a lot longer. You've done it professionally. You've written script. You've sold shows, and I would love to get into all of that. I think it'd be very interesting for our listeners. And then, as I was just mentioning too, I would really like to go deep into Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, and what your study and take is on that, because I think there's a lot of interesting and meaningful things we can pull, not just as writers and storytellers, but like, to me, it permeates all of life, the way that I always reflect on my own life and journey as if it's a hero's journey. And I'm sure you probably can't help but do the same. So we will get into that for sure. So I'll start you off. I have faith in you. I think you can handle this. This is going to be a very big question.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, Nick. Okay. Come on, guns loaded. All right.
All right. The question is this: what to you, what is writing?
Depending on how many other people you've asked this question for, it might be the same. But to me, like, writing is life. That's basically what it comes down to. I discovered my passion for writing when I was quite young. I would say 8 or 9 years old. And I can remember I used to have these little journal books that I would write sequels to like my favorite stories. And at that time I was into basically video games and movies. So I would write sequels to my favorite video game, which it still is Final Fantasy VII. So I'm pretty sure I remember very succinctly like finishing that game, and it's an RPG. I don't know if you know much about Final Fantasy.
I've actually played Final Fantasy VII. Of all the Final Fantasies,
okay.
That's the one that I know.
It's the most famous. It is the most famous. But it's also it's an RPG. It's basically a novel in video game form, right? And if you play it right, or if you do it right, or if you finish it all the way, it usually takes somewhere between 80 to 100 hours just to like beat the game, kind of thing. And so once that game had ended, like once the final credits had rolled, I just remember feeling so empty inside because I had committed so many hours to the story and I had fallen in love with all these characters so much, and I just didn't want it to be over. So once I had finished the game, I took out a journal and I just started writing like a continuation of these characters' lives kind of thing. And, you know, it was probably like, I don't remember how long it was. It was probably like a small book of like 40 pages back and front, you know, but to me, that seemed like a big deal at the time. And then once I'd finished writing that, I think I took a crack at like Jurassic Park 2. And this was before The Lost World had come out. And considering what The Lost World turned out to be, I still think mine might have been better. Jesus, I just not like The Lost World.
I believe it. I believe it.
But so yeah, so when I was like 8 to 12, I'd be writing my own kind of stories. And at the time, I actually lived in Germany because I was a military brat. So I didn't have a lot of friends growing up either because I was moving constantly from one town to the next. And so in a lot of ways, stories and movies were my friends, and they were the people or the characters, well, people to me, because that's all, they were my friends that I related to. And so once I came back to Canada, I started making more friends, and I started, I actually stayed in one place for a long period of time as opposed to moving around constantly. And so I stopped writing as much as I had been when I was living in Germany, but I still kept experiencing stories all the time because I still love movies. I still love video games. And I knew from those years when I had been writing that I wanted to write. Like that's what I wanted to do. Or I wanted to make movies is what I really knew I wanted to do, I should say. Before I knew I wanted to write, I knew I wanted to make movies. I think my original idea was to be an actor, but that didn't really stay for too long. And then by the time I was ready to leave high school, I knew that I wanted to still make movies. But by that point, I had fallen in love with like filmmaking, the process in terms of being a director. Like I got obsessed with a lot of different directors, specifically people like David Lynch, David Fincher, those type of filmmakers that have a very clear and unified vision that like as soon as you put on one of their movies, you know that that's them making the movie. You know that that's them behind the camera. And so when I went to Queen's, which is a pretty big university here in Canada, I took their film studies program. The problem is that I shouldn't have gone to Queen's because as prestigious as as Queen's is as an institution here in Canada, it's not really a practical place to learn how to make films. It's really more of a theoretical school to go and learn a lot about film theory and things like that, which at the time I just didn't put enough effort into figuring out when I was 17, 18 years old. So I went to Queen's. I had a great experience there. That's where I met Sarah, who you've had on your podcast as well. And we became friends during the course of that period. Like I don't regret going to Queen's at all. My life wouldn't be where it is if I hadn't gone there. But I didn't get the practical experience that I think I was expecting to get from there. I didn't even really learn much about writing there or even filmmaking. It was mostly just the history and theory behind films. It's critical thinking on films as opposed to this is how this movie was made. Or this is how you write a script. Yeah. It's more of like, what does this story mean? What are they trying to say with this? And that stuff I find very interesting, especially as I grow older. At the time, I really resisted it because I remember thinking that the one thing I didn't want to do while learning to make movies is to have like the magic taken away. And that's just inevitable. You can't try and make something without losing that piece of magic that makes it special when you don't know how it's done. Yeah. It's just you lose that, and like it's hard to accept that. And I almost dropped out after my first year because I was feeling that, like I was feeling the magic being drained out of me. But my parents talked me out of it, to their credit, and I kept going. And so when did I really come to writing itself? I guess I would say after Queen's, and I realized, we did a little bit of writing in Queen's. I think I had one playwriting course and one screenplay writing course through 4 years. So basically 2 writing courses, and they were each like a semester each. So not even full year courses. And I loved those courses. They were my favorite courses of the entire 4 years there. So I kind of fell back in love with writing again while I was going through those courses. And once Queen's had finished, and I took a step back and I realized, okay, well, I didn't get nearly enough practical experience making films to really pretend to be a director right now because I just didn't get that type of experience. But I got a lot of great feedback on my scripts. I really enjoyed writing. So I'm going to keep trying to follow that path and see where that'll take me. And the month or two after I had left Queens, I met another friend at Queens who was another writing partner of mine who I've written many scripts with. And the like month or two after Queens, we sat down and we wrote an entire 12 episode sitcom season. Like we wrote every single episode. We broke down the stories for each episode, and then we wrote the airlines, and then we wrote the actual season. And then we went to a couple local Toronto production companies, very small companies, just to pitch it. Basically, the companies that were never going to say yes in the first place, but at least they said yes to let us pitch to them. That's how small they were.
For the practice.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a great experience, but no one ended up buying it. But to this day, that was probably still one of the most fun experiences I've had writing, was just creating an entire season with one other person. And and
how long did that take for you, the two of you, to write that whole season?
I would say it took about 2 to 3 months in total. Like, I mean, we weren't writing together every single day, but we were writing on our own most days. And again, it was like 12 or 13 episodes, and I started off by planning everything out first. So yeah, it took a little while, but at the time, I think it was summer, so I don't even know if I was working. I think that was just like what I was doing for those 2 or 3 months. And then after the experience at Queens, I went on to try. Well, what I did is I moved to Toronto to try and find some type of job in the film industry. Toronto is the second biggest market for filmmaking in Canada. Vancouver is probably the biggest on the West End, but I don't live on the West End, so that was my closest. That was the best place for me to go. And after about 6 months, it was nothing. Like me, and it's so expensive to live in Toronto. So I had to come back to the smaller town that I live in now, which is Kingston, and basically try and save up money while I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And while I was doing that, I came upon this other school in Toronto called Humber College, and they have a course there called Producing and Writing for Television. And at this point, while I had pretty much only been a movie fan, more or less, other than television, I'd only watched a little bit of TV at that point. It was mostly movies I was interested in, and video games. So you can't watch all of it. You can't watch all of it. I had, like, around this time is when like the big prestige shows were really starting to take off. Like Sopranos was coming to an end. Breaking Bad was just on the verge of starting, I believe. Lost was in the middle of maybe its run. Like these big prestige TV series that actually took serialized storytelling to the next level were just starting to come out, and people were beginning to realize the promise TV was going to hold. And this was even before like Netflix really started streaming and all that stuff, right? Which would create a whole new wave. And so I decided to go to this television writing course. And at some point in that process, I talked to Sarah about it, and I told her about it, and she decided she would join that writing course as well. And so we went through that program together. It was only a year-long course, but it offered us a lot more actual hands-on experience in terms of writing, and certainly in terms of producing as well, in terms of actual production. And what ended up happening there, though, in terms of my writing journey, and I guess maybe I should focus on that, the main thing that came from Humber is that they introduced me to a book called Save the Cat, which is a book by Blake Snyder.
Great book.
Yep, it was, I believe at that point it was the first book I had actually read on screenplay structure and how to form a structure of story. And I liked it a lot, but it's very poppy. It's a very popcorn book. And it's also very specific to like almost like a Disney point of view, because Blake Snyder used to work for Disney. And so he basically created this entire formula for Disney and then made a book about it.
Yeah.
And so there's other books. Of course, there are hundreds of books on screenplay writing. And once I had finished reading Save the Cat, I started looking at a few more of those. There's like the OG book on screenplay writing, which is called Just Screenplay by Sid Field. And it's a really good book, and that was pretty much the standard the industry used for decades. It might have been replaced by Save the Cat, like that's how long it lasted, like before it was replaced.
Yeah.
And it's another good book, very dry though, very just formulaic and very much just screenplay specific. And then another book I found was called The Writer's Journey, which was by Christopher Vogler, and it approached story structure from a much different point of view. He focused on movies still, but he also focused on the ideas of Joseph Campbell, and he focused on storytelling as myth. And the other books hadn't really done that. And when I read that, I just kind of latched onto it. It really spoke to me. I had heard of Joseph Campbell even through Queens because of all the theory. They had certainly mentioned him a few times. I hadn't read any of his stuff, or I didn't really know anything outside about Joseph Campbell outside of the fact that I'm pretty sure George Lucas just stole this man's work for Star Wars. That's pretty much all I knew. And so once I actually read the Hero with a Thousand Faces, which I read after the writer's journey, I realized for sure George Lucas had just stolen his work. But I mean, George Lucas is fine. Everyone, by the way,
everyone has stolen his work. I was going to say,
yeah, I'm just giving George Lucas a hard time because everyone does. Yeah. So once I read that book, it really spoke to me. But I will say that the book that still to this day I interact with Joseph Campbell the most through is The Writer's Journey. It's not specifically Joseph Campbell's own works. It's Christopher Vogler's interpretation of those thoughts and theories, the way he distills them into The Writer's Journey. And so I've been working with that, I guess you could call it formula or structure a lot, especially since joining Twitter. That's what or X, whatever we're calling it these days. That's what I tend to talk about writing through that lens. Although, I mean, that's just right now. Once I run out of those ideas, then I'll probably jump to Save the Cat or Sitfield or one of those other books. There's another one called Story by Robert McKee, which is fantastic. If you've ever seen Adaptation, it plays a big role in that movie.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So much to that. Thank you for taking us through that journey, through that writer's journey right there. I have so many thoughts. One, I want to talk with you about David Lynch for sure, because I'm not a big film guy myself, and I love film, but I'm a very busy man and I don't have the time to sit down and watch movies. But I've watched every one of David Lynch's film.
Too many baristas
times.
to date, right, Nick? I understand.
Hey man, you got to fit it all in.
We're not all so lucky.
We'll be talking about that. Talk about your coffee shop.
Oh, we don't have to do that.
your coffee shop routine. See how that's going. But I've watched every one of David Lynch's film multiple times. And you were talking about not wanting to lose the magic of filmmaking. To me, no movies are more magical than a David Lynch film, because you don't even understand why they're so good or why they're so compelling. Like it's so hard to pin it down. I always like to say it's like they're like a dream. Like every other movie,
so does David Lynch.
Yeah, exactly. Every other movie is, even fantasy, even science fiction, it makes somewhat sense. You can like fit it into your consciousness. Something about David Lynch's films just like transcend that in this way for me. So I would love to dig into that.
Sorry,
go ahead. No,
well, I was going to say you used two key words there, in that transcend and consciousness. Like that's basically what it comes down to with David Lynch. Is like everything he creates comes from his subconscious, because he is a deep believer and a practitioner of transcendental meditation, which is like basically the only thing he really wants to talk about whenever he's interviewed about things. He hates talking about his actual movies. He certainly doesn't want to explain them. He loves talking about the process, and he loves talking about how much fun he has, especially with his actors who he almost always reuses, like Kyle MacLachlan, Laura Dern. But all of his ideas, like why you have that emotional connection to them, I think, is because they come from this subconscious place where David Lynch is connected to you and I, and we're all connected in the unified field, which is what David Lynch believes in, and so do I myself.
Yeah, and since this is the Laughing Stoic Buddha podcast, we talk a lot about meditation and consciousness and awareness. And I think you are a transcendental meditator yourself. Is that correct?
That is correct. David Lynch got another one. I mean,
is he the one is that where you talked you into it?
Yeah, I remember when I first discovered David Lynch, and it's hard to, I mean, I don't actually remember the exact first experience with David Lynch's stuff, which breaks my heart to this moment. All I know is that I've loved him, and I loved him for as long as I can remember. But I want to say Blue Velvet was first, but I might just be making that up. I'm not really sure. But certainly Twin Peaks has become the thing that I love the most by him. I mean, I do also love Mulholland Drive. I think that might be one of the best movies ever made. But Twin Peaks, taken as a whole, is probably my favorite television series. And certainly Twin Peaks: The Return, the recent limited series from a few years ago, is just one of the most jaw-dropping things I've ever seen on television, maybe ever. And the fact that he was able to pull that off and get someone to pay him to do it is just jaw-dropping, just amazing. But yeah, I am a transcendental meditation practitioner, and I've been doing it for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years now, almost. And it's something that I had wanted to do for a very long period of time because I had known about Lynch for a really long period of time, and he always talks about it. But at the when I was younger, like the world wasn't as well connected as it is today, and trying to find a transcendental meditation spot to go to and learn the technique was basically impossible unless you lived in Toronto or like one of the big cities in Canada.
Mhm.
And so as I grew older, I kept an eye on it. And then a few years ago, I think it was during the pandemic, and I had come out of a very long relationship, and I was looking for something to feel better about myself for and to improve my life. And then I remembered that, I've always wanted to try and learn transcendental meditation. So I looked it up again, and I saw that they actually have a spot in Ottawa where you can go and learn. It's not very close to Kingston, but it's only about an hour and a half away, and it's easier to get to than Toronto. And so I went there and I learned, and it's also not cheap. It does cost a pretty
Yeah,
penny to
I've
learn
heard.
the.
Yes.
So I also had to be at a point in my life where I could afford that. But it's a one-time payment though, so it's not like it's like, oh, you have to pay like every year or something, like you have fees or something. It's not that, and the money it goes to a good cause, right? It goes to teaching more people transcendental meditation. Like, and when you look at the fee that way, it's not a lot, and it's not um, a bad thing, I guess you might say, but it can put up a little bit of a block if you're not able to afford it. And but yeah, it's just been an amazing experience. So basically, I've been meditating every day since, twice a day, 20 minutes a day.
That's really cool, man. So I love to hear that. I think I've posted about this, talked a little bit about it. I've been meditating really off and on since I was like a teenager, but I finally made it a daily discipline, a daily habit about 4 years ago.
Mhm.
Meditate. I just do 10 minutes in the morning. Sometimes I do a second one if I need it, but it's one of those things. I write about meditation a lot in my newsletter, and I always say it's one of the hardest things to convey, to communicate to somebody, because it's the very essence of a subjective experience, right? It's
Sure.
completely an internal experience that you're having, and it's very hard to communicate to another person, and especially if they haven't had the experience of
Mhm.
what it means to be in deep meditation. There's kind of nothing really to reference. And so some of the things that I'll mention is like just the idea of you don't even understand how lost and attached to the thought stream you are until you step out of it for a moment. It's like not understanding gravity until you go into an anti-gravity chamber, right? Because
Mhm.
we're always here. It's a fish in
Right.
water. It's the same, but
Yeah.
fish swimming through water, and
Yeah.
they don't understand that they're in
Yeah.
water until
For
until
sure.
they come out of the water. So
Yeah.
I would like to just hear a little of you've been doing it every day, twice a day, 20 minutes for a year and a half. That's very dedicated. What have you found your personal subjective experience, your moment to moment experience? How have you felt it change or shift over that time of the practice?
Like during my sessions.
During the sessions, outside of the sessions, I would be very interested in what your personal experience is like during a transcendental meditation session.
It certainly varies, in the sense that sometimes you'll sit there for 20 minutes and you're just sitting there for 20 minutes. Like you're
Yep.
not really getting anywhere. You're not going very far. And sometimes that might be very discouraging, especially if you're just starting off or you don't really understand the process, or you don't, I don't know, I don't want to say believe in the process, but there are people who probably look at it like that, in terms of like, oh, it's just hodgepodge, or it's just like some gimmick, some new age ridiculousness. Um, and I mean, I wouldn't say I've ever felt that way, but there are certain times where I've had a session and been like, I probably just kind of wasted 20 minutes because like I could have been doing something. I don't really feel that way because part of me knows it's all cumulative. You know what I
Of
mean? Where
course.
like it
Yes.
all just adds on top of each other. So even though you had 20 bad minutes, you might not get those next 20 good minutes if you didn't have those previous 20 bad minutes.
Absolutely.
But during those good times, when you really do reach like a state of transcendence, it's just like I have like an app on my phone, and it's like the TM app, and it has like a timer. So I just usually turn that on to like make sure that I'm sticking to the 20 minutes, and then it makes like a gentle noise to kind of like bring you out of it. And sometimes when that noise goes off, I'm just like, it felt like 2 minutes. Like I didn't even realize that
Mm,
I had been sitting here for 20 minutes, right? It just kind of like you just become, the way I look at it is I'm going to say this word completely wrong, so I probably shouldn't even say it, but there's hypnagogic
Yes. Absolutely.
sleep. It's
Uh-huh.
kind of like that if you've ever experienced, or any of your listeners have ever experienced that, where you're just like, where you're awake, but you're asleep. And
Mhm.
you're asleep. Part of you knows you're asleep, but your conscious is still there and it's still capable of things. Another, like, I don't, I'm probably gonna go off on a bit of a tangent here, but like I like talking about hypnagogic sleep because of Philip K. Dick, who played a huge part in my development as well. But he became obsessed and like had like a psychotic breakdown due to his experiencing this state a lot towards the end of his life, and
Mhm.
actually believed that he was in like conversation with God and things like that because of it. But he wasn't a meditator. Like, I don't think I'm sure he'd heard of it. He was certainly a new age type of guy, but he wasn't a practicing meditation. Um, so anyway, back to what my experience is with meditation. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't say, and maybe this will disappoint you or other people, that like I haven't had like a deeply profound experience meditating yet. But that's what I'm working towards, right? Like that's what
Mhm.
I am meditating for, is to hopefully one day have this deeply profound experience. There's this other
I have a lot of thoughts on that. Please,
okay.
please continue.
Uh,
Continue.
there's this other concept. It's actually part of transcendental meditation. It's the ultimate goal of transcendental meditation, but they kind of call it something different from what I originally learned about it as, and that was called cosmic consciousness. And that's when, you just become one with the unified field, basically. And it's happened a lot throughout history with different people. If you go back and look through the history books, I mean, there's this book. I don't remember who wrote it, so I'm gonna do a quick look here. Do you have something you wanted to say? You had
Bro,
the
I'm very juiced right now. You have no idea how right in the wheelhouse of this podcast you are right now in the history of this podcast. Like,
oh, dude.
I'm very excited, and I think I'm going to give you and the listeners a whole novel way of maybe looking at meditation and the journey in general.
Mhm.
I'm very juiced. We're going to get back to Joseph Campbell and writing and the hero's journey and all that, but just because we're here.
Mhm.
Um, so I stumbled upon a spiritual teacher over 4 years ago at this point. Paul Hederman. He's been on the podcast multiple times. I bring him up. I used to joke that there was a drinking game. The first
Mhm.
time I bring up Paul Hederman, take a shot.
Mhm.
And I told Duncan about that, and he decided to keep saying Paul Hederman over and over again and make everybody
Okay.
drink. So I'm bringing up Paul. It's been a while, actually, because I'm now in this new world of X. I don't bring him up as much, but my
Right.
spiritual teacher, Paul,
Mhm.
talks about um, meditation and sort of the journey of being a seeker, of looking for that. And there's many different words for it. We can call it cosmic consciousness. We can call it satori. The different traditions have different
Mhm.
enlightenment, right?
Mhm.
A spiritual awakening. And he has this very simple shift in way to look at it. And for me personally, it made all the difference. And it was this: to attain cosmic consciousness, it's not actually something you attain. It's not something you get or somewhere you arrive.
Mhm.
It's the falling away of yourself. It's the falling
Mhm.
away of Sean or of
The
Nick.
veil. Yeah.
The
The
yes,
veil that keeps us. It's like Maya, I believe they call it in like Indian culture, right? Like
yeah,
there's like a certain veil that precedes overall reality, and then once that drops, then you perceive true reality.
yeah, and you can call it like the illusion of separateness would be another way
Mhm.
to say it, right? Actually, we're not separate, but we're under this illusion, we're under this dream that we're separate. And the most helpful way that I could say it is this: Nick, the personality, the ego, can never attain cosmic consciousness, because Nick is the very obscuring of it.
It's the ego, right?
The
Yeah.
ego.
It's,
The very fact that you want it means you
mhm.
can't have it.
Mhm.
But that which has it can never lose it.
Mhm.
And that which has it is actually what we are.
And
And
we're all capable of it. Like we all have a piece of it inside of ourselves, and
yes,
unlocking it
yes.
is the trick. But I think, and like when we talk about these things, I think that like, I guess you would call Western society has a real issue with it because like we champion the individual so much here, right?
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
idea of losing your ego seems like suicide. It seems like
Yeah,
death.
it is. Yeah.
It seems like the opposite of what we want to accomplish here in the Western world, which is kind of sad to me because I don't think it should be the opposite of what we're trying and should want to accomplish. I think the entire world would be a much better place if we were able to find it, because it's also not about, destroying yourself completely or having no individual personality. It's just about being able to connect with everything else around you,
Yes.
right? That's not to say that you can't then come out of that and be who you are and be your own person
Yeah.
and live in the life. It's just that in order to really and truly connect with the world around you, you've got to be able to almost quite literally do that. And by always putting up this wall of I'm me and no one else is me and I'm the special person, you're never going to achieve it, but you're also never gonna probably quite achieve the ultimate happiness that you truly could, which
Yeah,
is
and
life.
the peace that's on the other side of conditions and circumstances needing to be perfect for me to be happy or at peace. Like,
Mhm,
what if right here, right now, with all my judgments of what could be better, I could be richer, I could be handsomer, I could, have a
mhm,
better car down the line.
mhm,
Um, like those are never going to end, right? We all know that. We all know the billionaires that are depressed or that commit suicide, or the famous people. Like, obviously out there, outside of ourselves, we're never going to be able to set up circumstances. We're never going to get enough material to fully feel at peace, right?
mhm, mhm,
But it's possible here and now, no matter what's going on the outside, to like let Nick fall away, let Sean fall away. Not for forever. The people argue that it's like you're going to just sit on the couch, you're never going to do anything. Like, but
mhm,
just for a moment, to be able to let it all go. I heard this the other day. I've been quoting it like crazy. Be connected to everything, but attached to nothing.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
And in that way, you're connected to like Nick and Sean, the personality, but you're not attached to it. You're just sort
mhm,
of letting it be. This is very hippie, but I'm digging it. You're just letting it be the flow, the waves
mhm,
of the ocean, right? But you're not any individual wave. You're the entire ocean at once, expressing itself in a unique way.
mhm,
And I just wanted to like offer that as you're going on your journey of transcendental meditation. My guess is this, and this is from a lot of experience, talking to a lot of people and personal experience. You wanting that transcendent magical moment.
mhm,
I think it's when you give up wanting that is when you're
mhm.
actually gonna quote get it.
No, yeah, I agree. You're absolutely right in the sense that I remember, even for instance, like to take it back to writing a little bit, like I wanted to be a writer so bad, and I wanted to sell a project so bad. I wanted to work on a television show so badly, and it took years for me to actually get to that point. And in those years, between like leaving even Humber and actually getting a writing job, I almost had to give up on it. I had to basically say, you know what, this might not happen, so I'm going to have to do a plan B, which at that point for me was computer programming. And so I ended up taking a course on computer programming. And right before, during like the beginning months of my final year of that computer programming course, is when I got my writing job, my
Mm.
television writing job, and I had to I had to leave that course behind. But it's just like, and it's almost, and like we can take it even back to like relationships if you want. I remember when I was a kid in high school, like I was just that, that sad little nerd in high school who just always wanted to be dating somebody,
Same.
but just never could. And it wasn't until I had just been, I was like, I can't care anymore if it's going to happen. I have to just stop wanting it so badly, is when I actually started dating people. Like,
Yeah.
So it's the same thing in all walks of life. So you think I would have learned that lesson in terms of wanting the transcendental moment, and like some part of me has, and I think that in those sessions where I'm not expecting something is probably when I do end up getting the most out of it. But there's also just the times when you're like, do I really want to be doing this right now? Well, you're going to do it. And then you don't really get much out of it anyway, but you force yourself to do it. And that's important too, I think.
Yeah, like you said, it is cumulative, right? Even those times, like you know me, bro, when it comes to writing and my discipline stuff, like it's the days you feel like doing it the worst that you show up that are the most important, right? The days you feel like doing it, it's easy. You feel like writing, you feel like meditating, it's no problem. What separates a true practice from just like a whim is that you do it especially on the days you don't feel like doing it, right? And that will accumulate over time, and eventually, you're building a wall with a million bricks, and sometimes the bricks are super thin, but you showed up and you put that little brick in, and eventually over time it accumulates. And that's meditation, that's health, that's any sort of
Everything,
professional
basically.
project. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. It's life. So okay, that was very fun. I didn't expect to go down that meditation route actually, but that was really cool. Let's bring it back to writing, and I really would like to dig into. I haven't read the book. I need to put it on my list. The Writer's Journey, right? And who is that by? I'm writing it down.
Christopher Vogler.
Christopher
Right here. It's right here. Oh,
Ooh,
yes.
very nice. Beautiful cover. So let's. I know you mentioned I've read a lot of your interpretations, the posts that you put on X, and you've gotten a lot of juice out of this book for sure.
I'm not even like halfway through what I'm thinking of for this book. Like, there's still like I'm so far away from Save the Cat. Still, like, oh, that takes me forever.
You got your own book to write eventually by the time
Oh,
you
that
got
too. That
it. Got
too.
it all. So yeah, let's get into what because you had a lot of experience in school and studying movies, and you wrote scripts, and you had a lot of experience and read some good books like Save the Cat up until you came to that book. What really compelled you about it? What do you feel about it is different, and why, of all the work you've done, this is salient above all other for your own writing and your own study of storytelling, film, television?
I think it ultimately comes down to a little bit about what we were talking about with meditation, which is this was the one book that really dove into the idea of myth and mythology and archetypes. And at the end of the day, all of those things stem from the unified field, and they stem from what makes all of us connected. And it's what I believe our subconscious, whether we know it or not, in most cases, most of us don't. That's what we're looking for when we're looking to experience a story. We're looking for these benchmarks that we don't even realize we're looking for, but our brains are looking for them because we're so conditioned for them. And not, there can be like a negative context with conditioned, and like, in terms of being like, oh, it's just a trope or something, or it's just a boring way to tell a story because we always use that way to tell a story. But to me, I don't know. I don't really think that holds water, because I think that almost every story uses these archetypes, and the way that whether or not you can tell a story is good or not is how they use them and how freshly they interpret these archetypes. Because there is a point of that. You can't just recycle the exact same story in the exact same way. You have to bring your own perspective to it. And I think that this book allows you the best. It gives you the best foundation to build upon in terms of that. It gives you the most clear understanding of how these archetypes work, how they work within the structure of storytelling. And all of these ideas stem from this unified field with and the subconscious. Again, that's something that not only David Lynch talks about, but like Joseph Campbell, and also another big thinker that I love to read a lot of is Carl Jung. And like all
I
these,
was just going to ask you. It's so funny, dude. Yeah, I was just going to ask you about how much you've read Carl Jung, especially bringing up archetypes. I'd like to dive into that deeper.
Yeah, it's they all like Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, and Christopher Vogler. Like all three of them are just synthesized in this Writer's Journey book, which is why I think I respond to it so strongly, and why I tend to, if I'm stuck, or if I need to understand what it is I really want to achieve with this moment in a story, it's why I tend to go towards that book as opposed to any of the others. Which isn't to say that I think it's perfect, because I don't. I think, especially in terms of filmmaking, it's kind of a little bit outdated in terms of how they structure a story. In terms of how Vogler structures it, movies tend to be a little bit more fast-paced these days and exciting, and like the way that the accent tends to be a little different from how he necessarily points it in that book. But I think it still provides you the strongest foundation to just understand why storytelling has been around for as long as it's been, why we connect to it as people subconsciously, and I think that will just improve most people's storytelling in general once they understand those concepts.
Yeah, what I love about what you're saying is you keep saying unified field, which is really cool. We're going to get into that a little bit. And then also that most people don't even understand why they're compelled to listen to a good story, right? It's primordial. It's like built into us, right? When we're kids, one of the first things that will grab our attention, and that the way that we learn, the way that we understand the world is through storytelling, right? And the idea that you're saying that like we have this unconscious need to connect and understand, and the best way to communicate that through storytelling, which I agree with, is understanding the archetypes, understanding those foundational and the structure of what makes us human, what makes us connect to other characters that are outside of ourselves. Like, maybe I'm the timid, quiet, introverted person. Why am I so drawn to the extroverted, charismatic? And all that is like it's built into us. And this is going to Joseph Campbell's work. This is why he studied storytelling from all and myths from all different cultures all around the world, and found the through line. It wasn't just Western culture or Asian culture, but African and Native American, and he found that through line, and he tried to map it out the best he could with the hero's journey. There's been iterations on that by other people over time, but I love the idea that like if you're trying to tell a great story, write a great piece, make a great movie, you've got to start with the basics of what people are really drawn to, that they don't even know that they're drawn to, what that subconscious feeling of wanting to connect and understand and experience. And it feels like, from what you're sharing, this book is maybe the best resource that there is out there, as far as you've come across, to really
for writing,
understand,
for sure.
for writing, for understanding
Right.
those foundational things. So real quick, just to nerd out on Joseph Campbell a little bit, Hero's Journey. I have this idea. I want to hear your take on it. That is not necessarily metaphysical. This is like a very human, evolutionary based idea of why the hero's journey calls to the humanness in us so much. And it's this. So we think about life, like the beginning of single-celled organisms, we'll say, right? This is way pre-human. Single-cell organisms never made the leap in their story. They never made the leap to multi-celled organisms. We'll say there's some that didn't, and then there's an offset of evolution that did. They went to multi-celled organisms, right? So I like to imagine this is okay. I was high when I came up with this. I like
No. Single cell versus multi-cell organisms? No, this is a completely sober thought.
So I like to think that the storytelling of the single-celled organisms would be along these lines. We were born and we stuck to our shit. We did not go outside. We didn't multiply. We didn't take any risks. Like we survived, and like the mythology of the single-celled organism, basically, right, would be their value system would be, we stick to our shit, we don't change, right? And those stories would resonate with other single-celled organisms, right? Now,
but I don't know that they'd be interested in those stories if they were the same, but yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying.
I'm building here. Okay. The multi-celled organisms, their mythology, their storytelling would be that the huge leap in their hero's journey is, we started as a single-celled organism. We saw everybody else was the same, and we had the courage to say, fuck this, we're going to multi-celled organisms, right? And now other multi-celled organisms would hella resonate with that, because they're like, yeah, that is what we did. And that does make us special and unique. And that's why, our value system, all that, it differentiates them from the single cell. Okay, now we go all the way down the line, and eventually you arrive at human beings.
Okay.
What makes us human, what made us survive in the savannah of Africa, way back when, all the things that we did, is the hero's journey. It's the having the courage to, when you're in a drought, go and venture onto the other side of the mountain, find new animals to hunt, find new berries and plants to harvest, and all that, right? And particular to the hero's journey, you normally send like one or a group of people out, because you can't risk the entire tribe. You can't, on the other side might be a neighboring tribe, and they might murder you all. It might be a bunch of saber-tooth tigers over there.
Part of the hero's journey is making sure you bring something back to society. So yeah, you can't, all of society can't go.
Exactly, right. And so I think just using that little single cell, multi-cell, and then I skipped a lot of steps to go all the way to human beings to say that it
You skipped God making us.
sorry, well,
You
that's a
skipped
different
Adam and Eve.
that's a
You
different
skipped a
hero's
lot
journey.
of things.
We're going to eventually end up at the unified field, which is way beyond the human story. So
Mm.
I'm just giving you a little placekeeper here. So this is I've sort of heard some people talk about. I've never heard anyone really break it down in that way. So does any of that ring true in all of your study of the hero's journey? That what part of what makes it so human to us is because it's built into our evolution, our survival. Like these stories are not just like fun and interesting, but they remind us of what it takes to be a successful human
Mhm.
that survives and that takes care of their tribe and their family.
Right, because those tribes you talked about, I mean, they didn't necessarily tell these stories, they experienced them, right? And they experienced them for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And
Yes.
like that goes into our DNA and that goes into our blood. And then we all come from that DNA, we all come from that blood, and we don't ever, all this here in the 21st century, of course, and certainly in this privileged North American countries, don't get to experience that type of thing. But it's still there and it's still in our very DNA. And in terms of like how you were describing it, like the single cell organism, multi-cell organisms, like that all makes sense. To me, I guess I would look at it as like, again, we can use whatever character as the hero you want, whether it's a single cell organism or a human being. Like the first part of the story is it's the ordinary world. So it is this, and like those single cell organisms you were talking about that didn't want to go anywhere is because they just wanted to stay in the ordinary world. But most, or no, I shouldn't say most, but there's a lot of like those other organisms, the multicell organisms that want to venture off into the special world. And at some point or other, that's the second act of your life. And that's when it'll start, is once you actually venture off into the special world. And then the third act is about returning. It's literally, I believe, I can't remember the exact terminology Campbell used. I believe he used to call like Act Two initiation, and Act Three would be like the return. And so
Mhm.
Act Two is becoming something else. It's being initiated into something other than what you were. And Act Three is now bringing that back to where you were and seeing what comes from it, seeing how society around you changes, not just yourself, but how you can then improve the people around you. And so, yeah, what you were talking about, exactly that.
Right on. Okay, cool. So let's continue this then, because you mentioned a few times the unified field,
Mm-hmm.
archetypes, Jung.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take it beyond human evolution. We're really going out. We're really
We're going
going
to the
out to
story
it,
of
bro.
Star Child, like 2001. Okay.
Where do you see, um, maybe not like the ultimate conclusion, but like the next evolution, the next transformation of what the hero's journey? Like, okay, let's say you're telling a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can just tell the basic human being was in the normal world, needed to go out because he needed to save the tribe. Frodo or
Right.
uh, uh, you know Star Wars, right? Went out, saved the day, returned transformed. Now he's a hero because he went out, he faced the dragon, and he came back, and he's a hero. The tribe's going to survive and continue because of that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as like other ways of that, like bigger, broader ways of, one, how to tell a story in a way that's beyond just sort of basic human survival, and maybe something more on the transcendental, like evolving as a human culture? We get into like whatever AI or different directions that humanity's going.
Mm-hmm.
And also like personally, like how do you use, or do you see that people can use the ideas of the hero's journey in their own lives to like live a meaningful, fulfilled life?
How
That's a
can
big
they?
question.
How can audience members use the hero's journey to improve their own lives? Is that kind of
Yes.
what you're asking?
Understanding it. Yes.
Well, first of all, they're going to have to want to. Like that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. And like most people don't, let's be honest. Like, and that's
Yes.
fine. Like, I mean, that's not like people like me and you yourself who ask these questions also tend to be creative types who want to then explore them in creative ways. And let's be honest, most people don't have time for that, or they have
Yeah.
other priorities that they rightly prioritize in their own way. And so I think they need to have that desire, which immediately cuts off like at least 50% of the population, if not more. I think
Yeah.
so. And then it comes down to like what is what's the leading prevailing thought of the world? And today it's mostly science, which, science is great. We love science. But I also think it takes this stuff and it really kind of poo-poos it in a certain way. It kind of makes people think, well, none of this can be proven, so just ignore it. Like, you just wait till we show you all the facts in the laboratory, and then you can go down that path. But the thing is, the stuff we're talking about, they're never going to be able to prove that stuff. It's just never going to happen. And so people are just naturally reticent to approach it and to try and understand it. I don't know that storytelling and the hero's journey is really going to change the world at large. I feel like it would have done that already at this point, because it's still here. It's been here for so long. Even if Joseph Campbell just gave words to it in the early 20th century, and even if it's still just kind of being expanded upon more since then, it's always been there, and we've always used it, and we're still where we are. I don't know that it's going to change anything. I would like it to. I don't think it will, but I think that's okay. I think it will change people, certain specific people, and those people themselves might change the world. We'll see.
Yeah. I think it's a really good take, actually. I hit you with a really big question, and you handled it really well there. Because again, it's a very human way of telling your story, of understanding your journey, is the hero's journey. And I love what you said about most people get the call to adventure and they fucking ignore it. They hang up the phone, right? Because they're not uncomfortable enough. This is something a lot of people talk about on X and just in sort of motivational social media in general, is like you have to get fed up enough with your circumstances to be able to change, right? And for like someone like myself, I make good money. I could like totally just never pursue anything else outside of my little life, take care of my kids, this and that. But this calling of writing and of creating, of podcasting, connecting with people, like wouldn't leave me alone. Like I tried to fucking ignore it. I ignored the call for years and years, for like a decade, until it just was screaming at me, you got to do something about it. And my life has been infused with meaning, ever since. Every single time I sit down to write, every time I sit down to talk with somebody like you, like I'm rewarded. I get the feedback of like, you're headed in the right direction. Like you're on the hero's journey, whichever step you're on, you're going towards something. You don't know what that something's going to be, but like, I just wanted to commend you on saying that, like, if anyone is listening to this and they have been ignoring the call, like it's not going to go away. Either you're gonna die at having regretted never pursuing it, some sort of quiet desperation, or you're gonna fucking go for it, right? And someone like yourself, you've gone for it in many ways in your life. And
well, I've denied it too. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, I'm just like you yourself, and like it alternates sometimes. I like it depends on the thing. Like I shouldn't say I've never denied my call for writing. I have certainly, but not over my recent existence. But there's other calls in life, that you get that aren't just like my call for writing, and I've denied those even recently. I'm sure, if I were to really think about it. But, I mean, that's just life, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. We can't all answer every call we hear either, too, right? We've got to kind of, in a sense, and that's why this is part of the formula. Refusal of the call is a part of every formula, because it's a natural thing, and it's almost necessary to refuse every call first, because then you've got to experience the ones that, like you say, keep cropping up. Like it doesn't matter how much you refuse them, they just keep coming back. And it's those ones that you've got to then sit down and realize, okay, something in the universe is probably trying to tell me something.
Yeah. And you can say no infinite times, but you really only have to say once yes, like a real once yes, and cross that threshold. And once you've crossed the threshold, like you're in it.
Commitment. But I do think there are times where you have to then recommit. Sometimes, like, you're talking about earlier, like sometimes you just like, I don't feel like writing today, and like pushing yourself to actually do it isn't its own way like a recommitment, right? But I think there are also periods of times where I would even say, like, and I don't need to be talking out of turn here for Sarah, but like there's times in her life, even more recently, where she's probably gone away from the writing side of things to focus more on like what she's doing on X and her psychology and that type of stuff. And so that's a bit of a refusal, but she also talks about, especially more recently, about returning to that, because she then comes back and you can't keep suppressing it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's how when it's something that's really important to you.
It's kind of cool. It's kind of like a relationship, like early on, maybe you spend too much time together and you start to sort of take it for granted or whatever, and you go, oh, I need some space. And sometimes you get that space and you either go, oh, I'm happier with them not around, which is a good
Mhm.
sign that maybe we should break it off,
Right.
or you miss them. You go, oh, I was sort of taking advantage of this, and
Mhm.
and then the next time you spend time together, it's even better, right? It's kind of like you could have that relationship with a calling, right? You
Mhm.
kind of go, okay, I'm sort of in this too much. It doesn't feel as fulfilling or fun. I'm going to get some space from it.
Mhm.
And if the call is strong, if that relationship is strong, you're going to end up coming back to it, right? And
For sure.
yeah, and if you don't, like, it's a nice little sign to sort of understand what are true callings, what are really
Mhm.
true, deep and passionate to you, and what is just maybe something, an idea you entertained and you played it
Mhm.
out. You didn't
Yeah.
miss it. It didn't call you back.
Just like, again, too much of anything can be a bad thing, right? Too much of
Yeah.
anything. And like, even like, as much as anyone might, you could have someone who loves writing more than anything else in the world. That's what they love. But at some point they should put down the pen or put away the computer a little bit and try and do something else. Like, I
Yeah.
remember, like, I had no other passions outside of writing for a really long time. And sometimes I would just feel like really empty afterwards, because, like, especially when my writing wasn't being successful, right? When I was like
Yeah.
in my early 20s and whatnot. And that's around the time that I discovered basketball. And like, when I was a teenager, I hated sports. Like, I absolutely despise sports. By the way, I don't mean I can play basketball. I cannot play basketball. But I realized when I was in my early 20s that I actually really love watching basketball. Like, I really enjoy watching the sport. And that provided like a counterbalance to, like, okay, I can get almost as obsessed with basketball as I can with writing, but there's also not that added pressure of like wanting to try and make a living out of it. And creating like a pressure release almost helped with my writing too.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, finding some balance.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's cool that you like basketball. It's embarrassing because, again, I don't have time to watch television. I definitely don't have time to watch sports, but
Mhm.
I do. Especially as a kid, I loved basketball a lot. And then I'm in the Bay Area, so I love the Warriors. I love Curry,
Oh yeah.
Thompson, and
Yeah,
Draymond Green,
yeah,
and all
yeah,
that.
yeah. We got our championship off the Warriors. That's fine.
I
That's
know you
fine.
did. I know you did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so you're a
fine.
Raptor fan, obviously.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's really
Clearly.
cool. Yeah, your champions in the background.
It's the only thing
Man,
hanging on my walls is like Raptor stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
that's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, we could do another podcast on basketball someday, but
Some other
uh,
time.
yeah, to keep it on point here, the question, so along the lines of what we're talking about, I'm interested, since this is your podcast,
Mhm.
I'm interested in what is the calling, and you can be as specific or as abstract as you want with this. What is the calling that um, has been the strongest for you in your life? You've taken breaks from it. It's come back. Maybe it's morphed and changed over time. Like, just I'm wondering, is it writing? Is it movies, screenwriting? Is it television? Like, what is the one at this point in your life, in your journey? What is the one calling that you feel is pulling at you the hardest?
Good question. I mean, at the end of the day, I guess it would still just be, if we're going as general as possible, as writing. If we want to get more specific and niche about it, it's it's probably still screenplay writing, in terms of films, feature films. Like, that was what I started off wanting to write, and to this day, it's one thing I still want to knock off my checklist, so to speak. I've written for television a couple times. I was able to knock that one off, and I enjoyed writing for television. But a movie is just something, like, movies were the first thing I loved as a kid. Like, they were the first form of entertainment that I loved as a kid. I remember watching Ghostbusters and Batman and all of these movies, The Lion King, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like on VHS when I was younger. And that was just what I did, like, all the time, was watch movies. And so, yeah, I guess I would say that that's the one thing I keep coming back to when I think about stories in general. I'd say that they tend to be kind of cinematic stories. When I was working in television, certainly that got altered a bit, and most of the story concepts I was thinking of were a lot of television ideas, which are, they have to be different than movie ideas, because movies are so finite and television is so broad and wide reaching if it's successful. And that's what you have to plan for it to be successful, because otherwise, what are you doing? And so you just have to create so many more ideas, which is difficult. But at the same time, it's like the scope of the project is so much more broad that you don't necessarily get to hone in on these central ideas that you might like exploring in a movie. Like, you might have a dozen ideas you're going to get to explore in a television series, but they're all like on a certain surface level. because there's so many of them, and because television itself is pulling you in so many directions. Whereas with a movie, you could pick 2 or 3 ideas and just really drill down deep into them and explore them as much as possible in 90 minutes to 2 hours. So yeah, I guess it would be screenplay writing. And I haven't the last thing I wrote in terms of scripts was a feature film, but I haven't written a television thing in a while.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I've never written either, but it really makes sense. It resonates to me that writing a film, it's really more of a classical piece of art.
Mm-hmm.
It's an idea, or maybe 2 or 3
Mm-hmm.
that you can fit into one piece.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, yeah, television it's going to be this very broad,
The
this kind of
mosaic of all types of different things, characters and themes,
yeah.
and again, like that's all great stuff. And like a lot of it is the same with movies, but you just have more time, and you also have a little bit more artistic freedom with films, just a little bit,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
terms of getting out there, in terms of being different. Like David Lynch versus like whatever the MCU is, right? To be fair, David Lynch did do a pretty good job with the Twin Peaks Return being as crazy as possible, but that's
Yeah.
just David Lynch. That's not normal.
um, can I ask how many movies, how many films do you feel like you have inside of you here today that if you had infinite time to write, how many do
Mm,
you think are living inside of Sean's
oh,
unconscious?
dozens. I mean, I already have probably a dozen written in my computer somewhere, and I've got like 30 more. I mean, I'm really bad at like coming up with an idea, and then I think, oh yeah, that's a great idea, but I don't write it down, and then it just disappears from my brain. I'm so bad at that, and I always mean to, like, you know what, just put notes on your phone or just put down a message, but you're like, yeah, but I'm not going to actually write it because I've done that before too, and I haven't written it. You get that battle with yourself, but yeah, I mean, I've got dozens of ideas for movies. Certainly more ideas for movies than television, because again, like once you can have an idea for television, but you've got to find a way to make it last 4 years, and
Yeah,
for like
yeah,
40 hours of entertainment, and like it's so much work, and it's so frustrating at a certain point, because then you realize, well, I'm kind of getting away from my idea because I need to expand upon it in order for it to survive in this medium, and
hmm
then it's not necessarily as interesting.
yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm glad to know that there's dozens of ideas floating up in that brain of yours. I hope you you get one down. I hope it
Me
gets
too.
sold. I would love to watch a Sean Alexander film one of these days. So, okay, along those lines, thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
We're going to finish up the podcast with one of my favorite questions. I've been getting a lot of really nice responses from this. I have a lot of faith you're going to have interesting response as well. Because this is the Laughing Stoic Buddha podcast. Big thing in Stoicism, a big question that the Stoics always ask themselves, something I ask myself all the time, is what does it mean to live a good life? Again, a very basic question that's very broad, and it's kind of a way to point your life towards a North Star and uh, just the fact that life is temporary, that as far as we know, we only have this one life, at least as this ego, as this personality. So, what
Mhm.
in this life would you consider to be, if you got to the end of this life, you lived a full, healthy 100 years, you could reflect back and say, I lived a good life? What are the things that you're trying to do that?
Well, I would say pursuing your passions, making sure like living every day just to make yourself happy, as long as it doesn't come at the cost of someone else's happiness or making someone else unhappy.
Yeah.
To me, a big part of my life, what makes me happy is making other people happy. It's unusual, I've been told, but I don't know. I don't really I don't feel good getting things done for me. I feel better doing things for other people, and I'm
I can
happier when
relate.
other people are happy.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I would just pursuing your passions and making sure that you don't allow yourself to wallow in an unhappiness, and trying to figure, if you are in that stage in your life, make sure you try and figure out why.
Yeah. Yeah. Awareness, right?
Mhm.
Like unhappiness and depression, all that stuff is going to come, but understand why. And chances are, uh, the reason that you are is because you're not pursuing your passion. You're not trying to. And I also love what you said about making other people happy. One of my mantras is be of service, which
Mhm.
is not doing service. Doing service is a very like personal thing, like being a do-gooder, doing something to
Sure.
feel like you. But being of service just means being available, being
Yeah.
able to be present for somebody else, hold a space, help in any small way that you can. And sometimes that's just listening to them. Sometimes that's just,
Yeah, for
any
sure.
small gesture. So I think that's a pretty damn good formula for living a good life right there. Follow your passion and try to make other people happy. You'll
I've
make
done all
yourself
right so
happy.
far. Yeah, it's all right so far. We'll see. We'll see where
Yeah.
else it takes me. I'm hoping I'm only at least halfway. And I don't even want to phrase it because I'm just going to die tomorrow if I phrase what I was properly. So I'm hoping I have a lot of years left. That's what I'm saying. But so far, so
I'm
good.
hoping so too, man. We got some movies to make. So
Exactly.
yeah. Right
Well,
on.
thanks for having me, Nick. I appreciate it. It was fun.
That was fantastic, Sean. Thank you. Took a lot of good gems away from this. And let me finish with this. Promote what you got. Where can people find you and read your amazing work?
Right now, you're probably just going to find me on X, which is the writer's right, and that's spelled. The
Very
last
nice.
right is RITE, not any other form. So writer's right, RITE, on X, and yeah, that's where you're going to find most of the content we've been talking about here today. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Sean is a great follow, guys. Nothing but quality posts come out of him. If you're interested in anything about storytelling, anything about filmmaking and story structure and the whole deal, go follow Sean. I promise you won't be disappointed. I am so damn busy. I barely get to engage or read with anything on X these days. But when I do have a moment, I always read you. I always read Sarah. I always read Jamil. Like, you're in my very small little group of people
Thanks,
that
Nick.
I want to see
You
what you
too.
guys
I
are up to.
appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Right on,
I
buddy.
appreciate it.
Okay. A lot of fun, buddy. Peace. Namaste.
You
Keep
as well.
meditating. And we'll see you on the next one.
See you, Nick.
Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this conversation, please hit the like button. If you want to watch more podcasts like this in the future, subscribe and hit the notification to be notified when they come up. If you want to keep up with me, I am on Twitter now every day at write with a W already. Link to that will be in the description. If you want to check out my writing, I publish a newsletter every Friday through Substack. Link to that will also be in the description. I love you guys, and let's keep doing this together. Peace.